Okay. All right. Yeah, I just actually got off the phone with his grandpa, who I'm guessing is the owner of the boat. And he said,
Okay.
I just hung up with him. He said that they don't need any help right now, but if something changes, he'll call me back. So I'm guessing that they may have figured it out, because that's what he said. So they're in a panic, and they're both...
The shoreline of Horn Island looked different on July 6, 2026. 2 days earlier, it had been a place of celebration. Boats had crossed the Gulf waters carrying young people toward a 4th of July gathering, where music, drinking, and the freedom of a summer holiday had filled the island. Now, the search had become something else entirely. 18-year-old Nolan Wells was missing. And somewhere beyond the shoreline, investigators were searching for a young man whose family had expected him to come home. Nolan had arrived at Horn Island with friends aboard a boat that morning. According to GPS information obtained by CBS News from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the vessel left its dock at approximately 9:56 a.m. and reached Horn Island around 11:14. Later that afternoon, the boat departed the island at approximately 4:31 p.m. But Nolan was not on it. 2 days later, his body was found off the coast of Horn Island. That single discovery transformed what had begun as a holiday outing into a mystery that would attract national attention and raise questions that, weeks later, investigators still had not publicly answered. At first, authorities did not announce evidence of a crime. The initial suspicion centered on drowning. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter said there was no initial indication of criminal activity, while investigators continued working to determine exactly what had happened. But for Nolan's family, the unanswered questions were impossible to ignore. Why had Nolan remained behind when the others left? What happened during the hours between his last known sighting and the boat's departure? And most importantly, how did an 18-year-old college student end up dead on a remote barrier island? Those questions became even more disturbing when the first independent examination of Nolan's body failed to provide the simple answer everyone was hoping for. The family commissioned an independent autopsy. The preliminary findings did not establish a cause or manner of death. Instead, both were classified as undetermined pending further investigation. The pathologist found no fractures or deep tissue injuries, but the examination also documented an unexplained red discoloration involving tissue at the back of Nolan's skull. The significance of that finding was not established. Because the body had undergone decomposition, the pathologist acknowledged limitations that made determining exactly how Nolan died difficult. And crucially, the independent examination did not rule out the possibility that non-accidental factors contributed to his death. That distinction matters. Because saying foul play has not been ruled out is not the same as saying foul play occurred. There is still no publicly established murder suspect. There is no publicly announced homicide charge against anyone connected to Nolan's death. And as of this investigation's latest public developments, authorities have not released the official autopsy findings or toxicology results. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's autopsy has been completed, but officials have said the results have not yet been made public. Investigators have indicated that the case materials will eventually go before a grand jury, although prosecutors have stressed that a grand jury review does not itself mean a crime has been established. But 3 details have continued to stand out. The timeline, the unanswered circumstances surrounding Nolan's disappearance, and the medical evidence that has so far failed to explain how an 18-year-old went from a 4th of July celebration to a death that remains officially unresolved. There is another detail that makes the timeline even more important. Witness information obtained by ABC News indicated that Nolan had been drinking heavily on the island. Authorities suspected drowning, but his exact cause of death remained unknown, and toxicology results were still pending in the latest public reporting. So the question is not simply what happened to Nolan Wells. It is what happened during the final hours of his life, and whether the answers are hidden somewhere in the timeline, the digital evidence, the testimony of those who were there, or the forensic evidence that has yet to be fully disclosed. Nolan's family has refused to let the unanswered questions disappear. They have sought additional records and pursued their own investigation. His mother has taken legal steps seeking information from social media and technology companies, including Meta platforms, Snapchat, TikTok, and Life 360, in an effort to uncover digital information that could help reconstruct Nolan's final movements. And that is where this mystery becomes darker. Because sometimes, the most disturbing cases are not the ones where investigators immediately find a clear crime scene. They are the cases where the evidence seems to exist in fragments. A boat leaving an island. A young man left behind. A phone that became important to the investigation. A body that could not tell the medical examiner exactly what happened. And a family still waiting for the one answer that could finally connect everything. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He should have been preparing for his 19th birthday. Instead, his family is preparing for a future without him, while investigators continue trying to determine what happened during those final hours on Horn Island. And until the official evidence answers that question, the mystery remains exactly where it began, somewhere between the last confirmed moments of Nolan's life and the discovery of his body 2 days later. Nolan Wells was only 18. But the people who knew him described a young man with a future still unfolding. He was a college student and football player, preparing for what should have been another chapter of his life. Instead, his future ended during a 4th of July trip to Horn Island, a remote barrier island off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. On July 4, Nolan traveled there with friends aboard a boat. GPS data later obtained by CBS News showed the vessel leaving the mainland at about 9:56 that morning and arriving at Horn Island around 11:14. The island was crowded that day. It was a holiday, and large numbers of people had gathered along the shoreline. According to accounts reported by investigators and media outlets, Nolan was last seen alive around 3 p.m. Then came the detail that would become central to the mystery. The boat eventually left Horn Island without him. Friends reportedly said Nolan had chosen to remain on the island after meeting a young woman and intended to return later. But Nolan's family questioned that explanation, particularly because his phone and keys were reportedly left behind. That left a troubling gap in the timeline. If Nolan intended to leave later, where was he going? Who was he with? And what happened after his friends departed? The search began after Nolan was reported missing. Authorities, family members, and others searched the island and surrounding waters, using patrols, drones, and sonar in an effort to locate him. 2 days later, the search ended with a discovery no family ever wants to receive. Nolan's body was found in the water near the island. At first, investigators considered drowning a possible explanation, but the medical evidence did not provide a definitive answer. And that uncertainty is precisely why this case continues to demand attention. If you're following the Nolan Wells investigation, take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Cold Case Files so you don't miss the next chapter. The first hours after Nolan Wells disappeared were filled with uncertainty. His family was trying to understand how an 18-year-old could vanish from an island while surrounded by people. According to records reported by People, Nolan's parents and his football coach joined the search on July 5. Authorities used patrol boats, drones, and sonar as they searched Horn Island and the surrounding waters, Weather and equipment problems complicated parts of the operation. But another detail was beginning to trouble Nolan's family. His phone had reportedly been left behind. That mattered because a phone can preserve the final fragments of someone's movements, locations, photographs, messages, and other digital traces. Nolan's family later sought access to social media and technology records as part of their own investigation. Meanwhile, investigators were working from accounts provided by people who had been with Nolan. One version was that Nolan had decided to remain on the island after meeting a young woman. Witnesses also told authorities he had been drinking heavily during the gathering. Those details became part of the early timeline, but they did not answer the most important question: what happened after Nolan was left behind? Then on July 6, the search changed forever. A U.S. park ranger found Nolan's body near Horn Island. There were no obvious signs of severe trauma reported at the scene. Authorities initially considered drowning, and the sheriff said there was no initial indication of foul play. But an independent autopsy later reached a far more uncertain conclusion. The cause and manner of death were listed as undetermined pending further investigation. The examination also documented an unexplained discoloration involving tissue at the back of Nolan's skull, although the pathologist could not establish what caused it. And suddenly, the case was no longer simply about finding Nolan. It was about discovering what happened before he disappeared. Because somewhere between the last moments Nolan was known to be alive and the moment his body was discovered, something remains missing: the answer. One of the most unsettling pieces of the Nolan Wells investigation is not a piece of physical evidence. It is the gap in the timeline. Nolan was last known to be alive on Horn Island during the afternoon of July 4. His friends later returned to the mainland without him, reportedly believing he had chosen to stay behind. But Nolan's family questioned that account, especially because his phone and keys were left behind. Then investigators learned of another potentially important event: a distress call from a boat on the day Nolan disappeared. The call reported a boat in trouble, with the caller describing a sinking vessel. The circumstances surrounding that call have drawn attention because the family believes it could help clarify the movements and events of that afternoon. Importantly, no public evidence has established that the distress call was connected to Nolan's death. But because the timeline remains incomplete, the family's legal team has retained audio experts to examine the recording. At the same time, authorities have asked people who were on Horn Island that day to provide photographs, videos, and eyewitness information, particularly anything showing Nolan or possible altercations in the area where he was last seen. That request reveals something significant. Investigators were not simply trying to determine where Nolan went. They were trying to reconstruct what happened around him. The official investigation remained active, with authorities interviewing witnesses and reviewing information from the public. The sheriff also confirmed contact with other agencies, including the FBI. Yet publicly, there was still no definitive explanation for Nolan's death. No announced suspect. No confirmed homicide. No proven accident. Just a missing timeline stretching across the final hours of an 18-year-old's life. And until that timeline is complete, every minute matters. The investigation was no longer confined to the shoreline. As questions surrounding Nolan Wells' death intensified, investigators began turning toward the evidence that could not be seen in photographs: digital records, phone data, witness accounts, and the official forensic examination. Nolan's family had recovered his phone after locating it through an app. His parents later raised concerns that some messages appeared to have been deleted. That led attorneys for the family to work with prosecutors on examining the phone and pursuing additional digital evidence. Then came a much broader legal effort. The family sought records from Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, TikTok, and Life 360. Hopping those records could help reconstruct Nolan's movements and communications surrounding the final hours of his life. But the most important evidence may still be locked away. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner completed Nolan's official autopsy, yet the results have not been publicly released. Authorities have indicated that the investigation must continue before the case is presented to a grand jury. That creates a strange divide between what investigators know and what the public knows. The family has an independent autopsy that could not determine Nolan's cause or manner of death. The state has completed its own examination, but its conclusions remain undisclosed. And until those findings become available, one of the most important pieces of evidence remains hidden. If you want to follow this investigation as new evidence emerges, make sure you like this video, share it, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications. Because the next chapter may depend on what investigators discover behind those unanswered records. The investigation had reached a point where silence itself became part of the story. By late July, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner had completed Nolan Wells' official autopsy, but the findings were not released to the public. Instead, prosecutors said the report and other evidence would eventually go before a Jackson County grand jury. That did not mean investigators had concluded Nolan was murdered. It meant the investigation was still active. District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath publicly warned against treating online claims as established facts, emphasizing that her office could not reveal witness cooperation, evidence testing, or which information had been verified. Her stated goal was to present the grand jury with a complete investigation rather than a rushed public narrative. Meanwhile, Nolan's family continued conducting its own investigation. Their legal team brought in specialists to examine questions surrounding the water, the emergency sea tow call, and digital evidence. Ocean engineering experts were reportedly examining how Nolan's body came to be recovered near the island, while attorneys discussed a possible joint inspection of phones connected to the case. Then another detail emerged from independent investigators. A review of photographs, videos, GPS information, and witness accounts identified what was described as a significant gap between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the boat's reported departure. That finding did not prove a crime, but it showed investigators exactly where the unanswered questions were concentrated. The final hours, the missing minutes, the evidence that could determine whether Nolan's death was an accident, a tragedy caused by unknown circumstances, or something far more disturbing. And until the grand jury receives the evidence, the most important answers remain behind closed doors. As the weeks passed, the investigation became increasingly difficult to separate from the public pressure surrounding it. Nolan's family continued demanding answers, while investigators maintained that the case was still active and that no suspect had been publicly identified. The district attorney warned that releasing unverified information could interfere with the investigation and said the evidence would ultimately be presented to a grand jury. But outside the official investigation, the internet was creating its own version of the case. Social media posts began circulating accusations against people connected to Nolan's final trip. Some claims went far beyond what investigators had established publicly. Authorities and officials repeatedly warned against treating online speculation as fact. That warning became especially important when a purported toxicology report began circulating online. Mississippi Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall said the document was fraudulent. Then the tension escalated. 3 people were charged in connection with alleged threats involving individuals tied to the investigation, including a witness and a judge. None of those charged were identified as suspects in Nolan's death. Meanwhile, Nolan's family remained focused on the unanswered questions. His phone had become one of the most important pieces of potential evidence. Yet as of the latest reports, it still had not undergone the joint forensic examination the family wanted. Attorneys said they remained willing to cooperate with authorities over the examination. And so the case entered a strange new phase. The public wanted answers immediately. The family wanted transparency. Investigators wanted to protect an ongoing case. And somewhere between those competing demands was the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells. But the truth, unlike the rumors spreading online, could not simply be posted. It had to be proven. For Nolan Wells' family, the hardest part may not be the unanswered questions. It may be knowing that the answers could exist somewhere. Inside a phone, a photograph, a GPS record, a witness statement, or an autopsy report, while they wait for those pieces to come together. Nolan was found dead on Horn Island on July 6, 2 days after arriving there with friends for a 4th of July outing. His independent autopsy could not determine the cause or manner of death, while the official state autopsy has been completed but remains unavailable to the public pending grand jury review. The district attorney has promised that the grand jury will receive a thorough and complete investigation. Meanwhile, Nolan's family continues pressing for transparency. The NAACP has now joined the effort seeking answers, while members of Congress have called for additional scrutiny of the investigation. But one fact remains impossible to escape. There is still no publicly identified suspect in Nolan's death. There is still no official public conclusion that he was murdered. And there is still no definitive explanation for how an 18-year-old college athlete went from a holiday celebration to a body recovered near the island 2 days later. That uncertainty has allowed rumors to spread, but rumors cannot replace evidence. The truth will have to come from what investigators can prove. For Nolan's loved ones, that truth is more than a headline. It is the final piece of a life that was supposed to continue. If you want to keep following the Nolan Wells investigation, like this video, share it, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications. And now the question remains. What do you believe happened during Nolan Wells' final hours, and what piece of evidence do you think could finally reveal the truth?